Well, let's go with appointed. William Pitt took control of the British ministry, and Pitt is widely considered to have reorganized the British war effort and to diverted forces, to replace inept generals, to hire German mercenaries, and basically Pitt reorganizes the war effort that turns the tide of war, that eventually results in the surrender at Quebec and Montreal in North America, and culminates in the Treaty of Paris 1763, which ends the 7 Years' War. Now, what was the most identifiable result for North America of the French and Indian War? Well, we put this on the board. Go ahead, Danielle. Up on the other one. Go ahead. The most identifiable result of the Treaty of Paris was what? And so France was gone, right? So France's influence in North America was gone. They surrendered their entire North American empire to the British and to some extent the Spanish, right? So France was gone. And remember, that's when we talked about the implications of that. It was 1763 when the Treaty of Paris was signed, the first Treaty of Paris. The Treaty of Paris that ended the Revolutionary War is the Treaty of Paris 83. The Treaty of Paris that ended the 7 Years' War is the Treaty of Paris 63. When that treaty was signed, France agreed to give up their entire North American empire to the British and to the Spanish. And remember, that's when we talked about Franklin's sort of commentary on the discussion that was happening in England. Remember, some people in England said, well, gee, if we seize all of British North America, or we seize all of French North America, if we seize Canada, then the 13 American colonies will no longer be reliant on England for protection from France and their Native American allies. And so they won't need us, and maybe someday they will seek independence from us. Now remember, we said it was fascinating that Franklin in 1763 said, not only is that improbable, it is impossible. It's impossible, Franklin says in 1763, that the North American colonies will unify and declare their independence. Yes, go ahead.
I understand it was like bitter about the Albany Conference and how his plan was rejected, but wouldn't you, do you think Franklin was a right man? Wouldn't you have thought like he would have
well, I mean,
independence was kind, he just did it as like a way to set the stage for it?
Yeah, what Mulcairn said is Franklin, you clearly see in maybe that Franklin was frustrated by the fact that his Albany plan was rejected. And so when asked, are these colonists ever going to get together? He said, well, there's just no way. They're never going to do this. So, Mulcairn is saying, couldn't he set aside his own personal dissatisfaction? See, I think that maybe he might have been dissatisfied with the failure of his plan, but he might have looked out and said, look, these people really trust each other less than they trust England. I mean, in 1763, I don't think the relationship between these colonies and Britain was sour. I mean, one thing that is on the test, and actually is the next test, is that the war did expose some problems between the colonies in Britain. And there's a discussion in your book how the colonists felt that the British soldiers and officers and officials who came to North America during the war looked down on them and, treated them disrespectfully. I mean, Washington was only allowed to move up to the rank of colonel in the British military. I mean, and so there was some resentment to what they considered to be British arrogance. On the other hand, the colonists looked at the British in some cases as being cowardly, as being inept, and, looking down on them. The British looked at the colonists as being, unreliable, greedy, trading with the enemy, cowardly, unreliable in battle. And so there was some tension between the British and the Americans during the war. But I think in the immediate aftermath, Franklin is kind of right. Americans are not likely to seek independence. I mean, they were relatively happy under salutary neglect. But that sort of sets the stage for the actions of Britain in the aftermath, which kind of changed things. Oh, one thing that I would mention is the end of the war of, not of 1812, the end of the French and Indian War does expose the Native Americans and results in, to some extent, Pontiac's rebellion. Just real quickly, Parker, tell the kids, what was Pontiac's rebellion? Just really fast.
He was in
So Pontiac wanted to prevent white settlers from crossing the Appalachians. To do so, he and his supporters attacked the British forts and, wreak a lot of havoc. To some extent, what's Britain's response to Pontiac's rebellion? They respond with a controversial bit of parliamentary legislation. Do you remember? Go ahead, Kate Leonard.
Proclamation of 1763.
Yes, the Proclamation of 1763 is to some extent Britain's response to Pontiac's rebellion. What are we going to do about the problems of the Native Americans on the frontier? What are we going to do about all these white settlers crossing the Appalachians? How are we going to handle and control this situation? We'll just pass an edict that says it is illegal for American colonists to cross the Appalachians. This is the Proclamation of 1763, which infuriated lots of people, particularly in Virginia, because these people looked to exploit, looked to settle across the Appalachians. Now, besides the Proclamation of 1763, there were other things that Britain did that are going to infuriate the colonists. So much so, eventually, Mulcairn, that these reluctant revolutionaries, the reluctant American colonists, are going to declare themselves independent. But it's kind of crucial in understanding that you understand what mercantilism is. Tell me anything, Nicoletta, Washington, about mercantilism, anything at all. So you are saying that mercantilism somehow puts restrictions on colonial trade. Would you say this, Nicole Morrow, that mercantilism is kind of an economic system that sort of suggests that the economic activity of an empire should be controlled by the empire for the good of the empire? And so mercantilism, the ideology of mercantilism is that the British government should regulate the economy for the good of the British Empire. Now, under mercantilism, how was the good of the British Empire defined? What did you want to do? Yes, go ahead.
More exports than imports?
Yes, you wanted more exports than imports, which is called a favorable balance of trade. So you wanted a favorable balance of trade. Now, in order to get a favorable balance of trade, what Parliament was going to do is regulate economic activity, right? And discourage the colonies from doing some things and encourage them to do other things. The laws that were passed that kind of implemented mercantilism, what were they called? Go ahead, Olivia. Go ahead, Olivia.
Navigation Act.
The Navigation Acts. How early, Olivia, were the Navigation Acts? What's the first one? Do you remember? I mean, not that it matters entirely that much, but a year, anybody? Go ahead, Daniel. 1650 through 1663. So the Navigation Acts were passed in the mid-1600s. Right? It doesn't seem that colonial America has a lot of problems with the Navigation Acts until after the French and Indian War, which is 100 years later. Why, after the French and Indian War, do Americans all of a sudden, Mike, have problems with the Navigation Acts, which have been on the books for 100 years?
Because they're enforced.
Yes, so you are saying that prior to the end of the French and Indian War, that the British had really not vigorously enforced the Navigation Acts. That's what you are saying to me, Mike.
Exactly.
That's exactly what you are saying to me, and that's true. Now, one point that we made, remember we said this, we said not only did the British not enforce the Navigation Acts, but the British didn't spend or give much attention to colonial America at all. I mean, they sent royal governors over there, but these governors were not, carefully supervised, and the colonies sort of developed without them. I mean, they developed their own forms of government. They sort of established their own economic identities. And so in 1763, when Britain, now emergent from this Fourth War with a mammoth and powerful empire, seeks to tighten control on its colonies, there are problems, right? Now, besides tightening control on the colonies, remember we said that one of the biggest problems that Britain had was debt, right? And in order to deal with this problem of debt, the British are going to attempt to tax the colonists for the purpose of generating revenue. Now, there are kind of like, I don't know, what will we say, 3 ways of taxation. There is the Sugar Act, which is kind of, the stated purpose of the Sugar Act, and this is in 64.